Putin began discussing negotiations, but China banned Russia from certain activities. Zelenskyy noted that the world should respond to this in just 2 days. Valeriy Klochok, head of the Vezha Center for Public Analysis, traditionally works on weekdays. Greetings, I'm glad to see you. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Friends, we are working live on Channel 24. If you have any questions, please write to us, and Mr. Valeriy and I will answer them. I always read the chat. Today, we are summarizing the week's results by analyzing key events.
Як ми з вами всі чудово розуміємо, ми живемо в таких умовах та реаліях вихідних, але тим не менше, так, те, що відбувалося ключового, те й проаналізуємо.
In particular, the BRICS summit. Perhaps we shouldn't pay too much attention to Putin, as he failed to formulate an alternative to the event or show his strength. However, it is important to analyze the statements, especially after the summit. Putin and Skabeyeva said he was ready to compromise, but only on his own terms.
Скабєєва, російська пропагандистка, поспілкувався і сказав, що він навіть готовий до компромісів після того, як Китай та Туреччина йому можуть дещо заборонити.
Let's listen to what Bunkerny said and get back to the discussion. Any outcome must be in Russia's favor. I'm speaking frankly, without any hesitation, and it must be based on the realities that are emerging on the battlefield. And without any doubt, we are not going to make any concessions here. There will be no exchanges. We are ready to seek compromises, and we are ready to make reasonable compromises. But I don't want to go into details. There are no substantive negotiations. The Ukrainian side refuses to do so. We were just talking about the proposal from our Turkish friends. A UN event was taking place in New York, and Erdogan's aide called directly from there. He called Mr. Ushakov.
Мероприятие по линии Организации Объединенных Наций. Помощник господина Эрдогана Калын позвонил прямо из Нью-Йорка. Позвонил господину Ушакову и сделал предложение от имени украинской стороны.
The head of the Ukrainian regime publicly stated he would not negotiate.
Публично заявил, что вести никаких переговоров не будет.
Valeriy, what is behind this statement? You may have noticed new accents. Did the final BRICS communique show that even his semi-friends do not want peace on Putin's terms? The point is that I have been saying, am saying, and will continue to say to Putin, a pause is very important. He needs a pause in the war, and he needed it last year, and he needs it now.
Вона потрібна була і минулого року, вона потрібна і нині. Але в умовах, які складаються, Путін розуміє,
in the current circumstances, Putin understands that a pause won't automatically lift sanctions, which are becoming stricter and making it harder to operate in Russia. While the military-industrial complex has significantly advanced and is driving GDP growth, many experts believe the current economic model has reached its peak.
Нинішня економічна модель досягла свого піку. Путін то прагне її перевести в закритий режим.
Putin is trying to turn it into a closed economy, but the dependence on the outside world is very high. Even the Soviet Union had it, although the model of the Soviet economy was as closed as possible. Foreign economic and trade ties existed during the time of the so-called Great October Socialist Revolution until the end of the actual existence of the Union.
Це означає, що ізолюватися ти повністю не зможеш. Та навіть Північна Корея, вона, коли переживала ось часи ізоляції в період ковіду, то...
This means that you cannot isolate yourself completely. Even North Korea, when it was going through the COVID pandemic, suffered significant population losses due to famine. People died there in tens, hundreds of thousands. There's no exact data, but everyone knows what happened there. This means that even with a frozen war, Putin must remain in sanctions isolation so that he does not build up his ability to restore his military capabilities. When he says, "I am ready to negotiate," he expressed the same last year. He is ready, but on his own terms, referencing the basic Istanbul agreements. In a twisted sense, it's clear that Russia, as an invader, has little to concede. However, the key point is that Ukraine currently lacks the military capabilities to expel Russia. Today, a very interesting comment was made by the commander of the U.S. forces in Europe, General Cavoli, who said that Russia still has an untapped potential for war. Russia hasn't fully utilized its strategic aviation against Ukraine and has the capacity to manufacture weapons, making its army stronger. Putin has the capacity for a long war, which he and our Western partners recognize. However, they are ready to help us because Putin has not achieved his specific goals.
Це розуміють на Заході наші партнери, але вони готові нам допомагати, щоб Путін не зміг домогтися конкретно своїх цілей, так званої СВО.
And here it is important to understand how Russia will exist if, for example, all the economic forecasts regarding the stability of the Russian economy actually come true. Because it is, well, really overheated by the military-industrial complex. As the laws of economics show, when the economy of any country switches to a military orientation, it is limited to weapons production. Then you either need to maintain an intensely high level of war to replenish the stock of weapons and produce them. Russia currently has the resources to produce, with $200 billion expected from oil sales this year. However, as sanctions against countries cooperating with Russia tighten, the pressure on them increases. This will eventually reduce Russia's ability to sustain a high-intensity war, and Putin understands this.
І це в перспективі означатиме зменшення спроможності Росії вести війну такої високої інтенсивності, Путін це розуміє. Йому головне завдання зараз...
His main task now is to ease the sanctions policy through any compromise agreements. This would allow him to restructure the economy, accumulate more weapons, and prepare for a new attack. Of course, we cannot do that. The West has not yet set out a clear model of what and how it will offer Putin together with Ukraine. Because, well, friends, we have to understand that our proposals in terms of ending the war should be synchronized with our Western partners, especially with regard to their cooperation with Russia, which is certainly still there. It harms us greatly. And the fact that Putin is talking about Russia receiving some proposals through Turkey from the Ukrainian side preliminarily confirms the truth of Zelensky's statement. A few days ago, he stated that if there are no strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, Russia won't launch strikes on its territory. If the grain corridor operates properly, it may indicate Russia's willingness for some concessions. Putin is essentially responding to Zelensky, suggesting readiness for negotiations. However, the situation is more complex than oversimplifying it to Putin simply stating that he won't strike in response to Zelensky's request. Putin's statements should be seen as an indication of his readiness for some compromise solutions and negotiations. While in New York, we were in a limited circle and knew little about him publicly. In contrast, people in Ukraine and Russia knew more. This reflects the nature of diplomatic games. Unfortunately, as President Zelensky and his advisors confirm daily, the situation remains complex. He has stated that the process of returning territories is currently controlled by the Russians and may take time through political and diplomatic means, involving significant bargaining. By using this phrasing, Putin considers the wishes of his partners, particularly China, as reflected by the numerous Chinese voices at the summit. Kazakhstan and Brazil, despite not being represented, also expressed their disinterest in BRICS. These are noteworthy signals. India defiantly left the BRICS summit. This all means that pressure on Putin has been exerted. He now realizes that there are certain limits within which he can act. Namely, he has limited resources. Korea will help him a lot. I have no doubt about that. The cooperation will continue, but North Korea will not be the only one to determine Putin's success. However, once again, as Robert Cavoli, the American general, says, do not underestimate the enemy. We need to adequately calculate our capabilities and forces and make decisions accordingly to strengthen our own positions. I'm not saying this for my own sake, but to improve our negotiating position. Because, of course, for example, Lloyd Austin's statement, which Ms. Iryna Uzlova and I have already discussed, or at least mentioned, which he made from Rome after meeting with the Pope, that Russia's war against Ukraine will end in negotiations at some point. It just testifies to this. And even the president said that at some point, negotiations could take place first, and then a peace summit, and so on. Various statements. Even the discussed T-shirt sends a message to Putin that things won't be easy. To conclude, I want to mention that today, at the Vezha Center for Public Analysis, we had a meaningful discussion on this issue. This episode will be on my channel today, and I recommend watching it, as we analyze the BRICS and the statements of Putin, Xi Jinping, and other officials in depth.
Я вам рекомендую, не пошкодуєте, тому що ми дуже глибоко розбирали саме BRICS.
Schultz's recent statement on NATO is literally fresh. In our opinion, this was not done by chance. The story is not over yet. BRICS has simply shown that Putin has no allies in the war in the coming years, and he needs to make some decisions. Now it will depend on the West to see if Russia can quickly recover for a new big war.
Саме те, чи зможе Росія швидко відновитися для нової великої війни.
Klochok Times, active link to YouTube in the description below the video. I urge you to subscribe if you want more analysis from Mr. Valeriy and other political strategists. We are currently being watched by over 600 people, and 140 of them have already subscribed. Please be more active in your support. It helps to promote our conversations on YouTube.
140 людей поставили лайки, поставте, будь ласка, активніше, вам не шкода, всі ці ваші дії дозволяють нашим розмовам просуватися просторами Ютубу.
President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, warns the world against escalation, claiming that North Koreans may appear on the front line on October 27th to 28th. He calls on the world to put pressure on Moscow and Pyongyang to comply with the UN Charter and punish escalation. China is unhappy with actions by North Korea, sending troops to participate in the war against Ukraine. At least, this is what experts who know about Sino-Korean issues say. At the same time, we see that China has also stated that after the BRICS summit, starting on December 1st, it will exercise control over drones that are supplied, in particular in the Russian Federation.
Тими безпілотниками, які постачаються, зокрема, на території Російської Федерації, тому що, як цитує CNBC заяву He Yanduna, заступника офіційного представника китайського Мінторгу.
This is supported by Chinese Ministry of Commerce deputy spokesperson He Yandong, who states that using civilian drones for military purposes is impossible and unnecessary. While he doesn't specifically mention the Russian-Ukrainian war, do these actions indicate that China is no longer just an ally but also a partner of Russia? When Zelenskyy calls for global pressure, who exactly does he mean? Who should ensure that DPRK's cooperation with Russia doesn't expand? Friends, I see the statements that are being made now as synchronized and coordinated. For example, the Chinese, even the West, because just look at the common positions of the United States and Europe today regarding the visit of UN Secretary General Guterres to this meeting. This means that today the West has agreed that Guterres can enhance the influence of Xi Jinping and other world leaders on Putin to halt the hot phase of the war, at least temporarily. The Ukrainian president has frequently stated that the hot phase must end before any dialogue with Russia can begin. Consequently, as the Financial Times notes, my colleagues and I have discussed the lack of consensus among experts regarding the satisfaction with North Korea's cooperation with Russia. Why? Because in this way, Russia has made North Korea a subject. It is harder for China to control Kim Jong-un, and Kim Jong-un today realizes that he has become financially, let's say, not quite, but less dependent on the outside world. He maintains active trade relations with China, and China now realizes its interdependence with North Korea.
Китай розуміє взаємозалежність тепер з Північною Кореєю, складний процес, так відбувається, але це означає послаблення ролі.
It's a complicated process, but it means a weakening of China's role on the Asian continent, which China will not like.
Не все так буде. І якщо ми говоримо про саміт БРІКС, також зверніть увагу.
He is telling Putin that things won't unfold as he expects. Regarding the BRICS summit, it's notable that Xi Jinping didn't mention multipolarity. He is focused on building his own Chinese axis, while India and Russia are pursuing their own paths. This is beneficial for us, as BRICS won't be the sole entity attempting to establish a military wing.
У прагненні і створення якогось військового крила, але окремі альянси в рамках цього саміту, звісно, можуть бути.
But there may be some alliances within the framework of this summit, of course. However, they will not be as strong as if all these countries united, and this is good. You know, when we talked a lot about the threats from BRICS, experts, my colleagues in Ukraine and abroad, emphasized this throughout the year. Our Western partners heard this discussion, which took place both in Ukraine and in the West. They understand the threats that come from there. The fact that China is making such statements indicates the success of the strategy that the Western world has chosen in relation to this meeting. After all, there seemed to be no major criticism at first glance. Please note that the U.S. State Department, when expressing its opinion on this meeting, said, "It's okay. You can form alliances within the BRICS."
Але Індія вирішила дещо по-іншому. Вона вирішила не підтримувати бажання Турчини.
Mark Rutte mentioned that Turkey could be included, but India opposed Turkey's bid for BRICS membership, leading to Erdogan receiving a firm no from BRICS members. Erdogan is pressuring Putin by saying, "Stop the war, then we can talk." This complex geopolitical game is unfolding amid ongoing shelling in Ukraine.
Постійних обстрілів по Україні, друзі, але ми повинні з цією реальністю працювати. Це те, що ми маємо пояснити і вияснити. І те, що сьогодні є...
But we have to work with this reality. This is what we have to explain and realize. The fact that today, I believe, there are quite positive statements from China, I'm very critical of them. I understand what is behind the Sino-Brazilian plan. But Putin, who categorically insisted on the Istanbul agreements, should note that the day before the summit, the Istanbul agreements are nothing. This is nothing. Only this is not going to happen. While some officials in Putin's circle have stated otherwise, we've noted that Shoigu adopts a pro-Chinese stance due to Russia's heavy dependence on China. Russia's economy is fragile and faces significant challenges next year. While it may not collapse, sustaining high levels of arms production and warfare could be problematic for Putin.
Але підтримувати настільки високу інтенсивність виробництва зброї, війни і так далі для Путіна може бути проблемою. Тобто треба
We need to reorient the economic model, which is a major challenge. The issue isn't that resources will be completely depleted. They can still generate revenue from oil sales and conduct transactions with gold. However, if the West and China can find common interests, there may be shifts in the situation. I have no doubt about this.
Але якщо буде позиція Заходу, ну і того ж Китаю, через досягнення спільних точок інтересу, не позиції навіть, а точок інтересу.
China can influence this, but we should not hope that China, for example, will meet all the needs of Ukraine, the West, and so on. No, this will not happen, unfortunately. We really need to build our policy based on these realities. For example, I think it was a good decision for Zelenskyy to say, "We are not making that decision today because he was in Kazan, so let him not come to us now." This is a position. This public position is a positive signal that diplomatic dialogue is ongoing. Putin's and China's recent statements should be viewed as diplomatic gestures, and it's encouraging that the press is responding appropriately. Furthermore, sources from AFP and RBC Ukraine confirm that Guterres will not be in Ukraine.
Дійсно, одна із свіжих інформацій про те, що не буде Гутерреша в Україні, підтверджують цю інформацію джерела AFP, джерела РБК Україна в офісі президента.
After Kazan, Guterres planned to go to Ukraine, but the president did not confirm his trip.
Тому Гутерреша тут не буде, зокрема через приниження здорового глузду та міжнародного права в Казані, сказала високопоставлене джерело в адміністрації президента України.
During talks with Putin, he stated that Russia's intervention in Ukraine violated the UN Charter and international law. Some, including Mr. Valeriy, question where Guterres is in addressing this with an unresponsive Putin. However, he left. Some believe he aimed to emphasize that the UN Charter cannot be violated, while others see it as highlighting the organization as a money laundering entity. As some experts call it, friends, I believe that Guterres did not go there to see Putin. In general, my colleagues said a very cool phrase today during the discussion, which once again, you can watch on my channel in the evening. It was she, not Putin, who invited leaders to the BRICS summit, and some hesitated to attend, fearing it would appear as a visit to Russia. Guterres' visits should be seen in the context of his engagement with Xi Jinping and the strengthening of Xi's position, as the Chinese leader can reference the UN in discussions with Putin. Notably, we have not heard any statements supporting Putin's actions. Thus, China has refrained from commenting directly on the presence of North Korean troops in Russia. So far, this is true. He noted that we had not seen this, but a similar statement was made by the State Department a few days ago. Lloyd Austin said, "We don't know anything. It's not about us. We don't see it." And then a little later, the White House said that we have information about the presence, but we don't know their mission. This is such diplomatic language, diplomatic dialogue. The European Union just yesterday issued a statement that it supports Guterres' visit to this meeting. This means that today the Western world is ready for a dialogue even with the part of the BRICS members who support a pro-Chinese position, not a pro-Russian one. Thus, Xi has now been strengthened, and unfortunately another pole is being built on the Eurasian continent, the Chinese pole. Putin wants multipolarity, but China is far from thinking that it wants multipolarity. It sees itself as the only leader on the entire Eurasian continent, at least on the Asian continent. If things don't work out with Europe, because there is a lot of money, investment, and so on, then the Asian continent is definitely in its interest.
Інтересів, наприклад, на Корейському півострові також у великій мірі буде залежати і просуватися.
For example, on the Korean peninsula, its interests in cooperation will also depend to a large extent on how focused it is on dialogue with Russia. That is, it needs to be strengthened, and Guterres' visit could indeed be a way to strengthen it. It is difficult for me to say what other motives the president of Ukraine had for not receiving him in Ukraine, but I think they are determined not only by the public side of this visit of the UN Secretary General to Kazan. Most likely, there were some other ulterior motives that the president cannot talk about. I see this visit now, and believe me, I don't like it either. However, I would like to draw the attention of many who are criticizing Guterres' visit to Lukashenko's statements. I'm sorry to divert the attention of our viewers like this, but I simply advise you to review all the comments he made today. They are completely at odds with the Kremlin. Kuchma's phrase is irrelevant here, as the situation has already unfolded, Mr. Valeriy. In December 1939, the USSR was expelled from the League of Nations for its pact with Germany and aggression against Finland. Why can't similar mechanisms be found for addressing aggression, bloody wars, and genocide today? International courts are currently considering lawsuits against Putin and the Kremlin. We spoke with Anton Korinevich, ambassador-at-large of the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, who is involved in lawsuits against various types of Russian criminal activity in Gaza and elsewhere. Why can't they deprive Russia of the veto? Why is this issue not being raised by Guterres in Kazan? This would mean that the West is not ready to zero in on Russia today. The president, when he wore a T-shirt with the inscription, "Let's make Russia small again," was not saying this by accident. This is the goal we are moving towards to destroy the Russian Empire. However, for the West, the rise of China is a serious challenge. This is absolutely obvious, and the West today seeks to preserve Russia by any means necessary. For the West, it is the preservation of Russia within the limits and borders that exist today that is the number one task. Otherwise, the flow of migrants will be so incredible that Europe will not stand it. Please note that even now, some decisions have already been made to close border crossings, cross-border crossings with Finland, and even France is closing some crossings. The Schengen area is also being restricted, meaning that you can't just go to France, for example, if you have a passport of a member of the European Union. If you do, you can enter, but there are controls to limit migration. Indeed, this is one of the main reasons why the idea of Russia falling apart is so cautiously treated today. Although these processes are not reversible, Russia will eventually fall apart, but Europe is trying to delay this period as far as possible, because the defragmentation of Russia means strengthening China's resource base. China is seeking outright expansion of Russia, and it cannot conduct, for example, a military one, nor can it incorporate parts of its territory, such as the Far East or other areas, into its constitution, although it would be very happy to do so. But by pursuing a consistent policy of economic dependence, it is somewhat successful. China is well aware, I think, that sooner or later it will be able to take some territories. It will be able to take control of them. The West aims for frozen conflicts along the front lines to keep Russia intact for the foreseeable future, while strengthening its defense capabilities against the clear threat of a major conventional war between Russia and China and the West. Therefore, the scenario of defragmentation may be postponed, but not at this stage. I can see the West's intentions today. Valery, thank you for your comments this week. See you on Monday, live on YouTube, 24 at 11. We look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much. Valeriy Klochok, head of the Vezha Center for Public Analysis. I am grateful that almost 1,000 people spent this time with us. Leave comments when you watch us on the recording. Subscribe to YouTube. Your actions help to promote our conversations online. Take care. Believe in the armed forces.